All right, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Evangeline. I work for the Office of Proposal Development. Thank you for coming out to figuring out funding, how to make a budget for a grant proposal. Today, we are excited to have with us Jen Gary, who is the Director of Business Operations at the Office of Research, and Laura Schecker, who works as a grant officer for sponsored research. So anyway, if you have signed up and make sure your email's on here, that is awesome. We'll be sending you a fun fall lineup of our workshops. For this year, we have some amazing ones like data management plans and perfecting your elevator pitch as a researcher. So great stuff coming up. Without further ado, I know you have a lot to cover. I'll go ahead and hand it over to you. Thank you.
Great. Thank you all so much for coming out. As Evangeline said, my name is Jen and this is Laura. Just a quick poll, how many faculty? Mostly faculty. And then departmental, like research administrators, like grants analysts. Okay. I think that was all the hands. All right, just kind of get a gauge for what we've got. We built this to be pretty high level to kind of run through some of the topics because we've got some hands-on exercises at the end so you guys can really, get your hands dirty and figure this out. But please Q&A all throughout. There's no need to hold questions until the end. If we touch on a topic too quickly and you guys want to delve in further, please let us know. If it's a question that I've got a slide for later, I'll say hold that thought because we're going to come back to it. But please feel free to interject throughout. So let's get started. So today we're going to go over the concept of building a budget. Then we're going to talk a little bit about types of costs, calculating salaries and fringe, calculating indirect, and then as I mentioned, some budget exercises at the end. We've also got a budget workbook that we've built that faculty will have available through Sponsored Research's website. It was developed as part of the new eSphere certificate series that they've created. So that's something that you guys will be able to utilize as well going forward to be able to build your budgets. It has a lot of formula functionality built in, so calculating fringe and all those things, it does a lot of automation for you. So the concept of building a budget. So as faculty or as departmental administrators, when you're interacting with faculty, I always like to think about it as the 5 W's, who, what, when, why, and where. What do you need to carry out the proposed project that you are writing your budget for? Who typically is your biggest cost? That's usually where you're going to find the most of your expenditures in your budget. This is obviously as the PI yourself. This can be co-PIs, this can be postdocs, grad students. This can also be faculty at other institutions. So if you have someone else that you need to issue a subaward to that you need to work with. It can also be consultants. So think about anyone that you're going to need to be involved and pay on the project is going to build your who component. Then you've got your what. This varies very much depending upon the type of project that you're working on. So general categories we've included. Supply costs, this can be consumable supplies that you need. This could be surveys that you're printing because you're collecting data. There's a lot of things that can fall into the supply category. You've got auxiliary services, so if you're having to pay an auxiliary here on campus, so that could be anywhere from microscope time to data analysis to project management that we have some of those services involved. So anyone internally on campus as an auxiliary as a service provider that you need to pay. Publication costs. Obviously that's a big portion of the research is to get it published after the fact. So publication costs can be built into your budget. And then equipment. So this is things that are over $5,000, have a tangible life of more than a year. Anything under $5,000 can go in your supply category. So if you need a computer because you need a dedicated computer for something for a graduate student to work on, that can be built into the budget. Most computers these days don't cost over $5,000 unless you're buying something really fancy. So that can go in your supply category. So equipment needs to be actual capitalized equipment. So then where, this has a couple implications on the budget. So where as far as do you need to travel to carry out the project? Is there field research involved? Where could be do you need to travel to a conference to present the findings or to gather information for the project that you're working on? It also impacts your F&A rate, whether the project is on campus or off campus. Where is the work going to be conducted? More than 50% of the project has to take place off campus to qualify for the off-campus rate. You also have to direct charge rent. So you need to be paying rent to some facility, or it needs to be a field, like you're going out into a cornfield, I've seen those, and doing some data analysis. That can be done off campus. So and we'll get to the indirect costs and the F&A rates a little bit and kind of touch on that some more. When most funding sources are allocated annually, so it's important to think about how long the project is going to take. Are you budgeting for 1 year of cost? Are you budgeting for 5 years of cost? Are you budgeting a month in year 1 of salary, 2 months in year 2? All that gets very important because, as I said, when those allocations come in to give you that budget authority to spend, you want to make sure that you've got enough budget authority for the work that you're carrying out at that point. So thinking about how long the project takes and what work is going to take place during the project is really important in mapping out that total budget picture. And then why? At FSU, all project budgets, with the exception of NIH modular budgets, require budget justifications. And I will say for modular budgets, we still encourage them. They make it much easier on both the department and the central office to manage the award if there is a budget justification. But for modular budgets, they're not required. So everything else you're going to have to say, why do you need these costs? Why do these things need to be direct charged to the project? Why are they allowable? Laura's going to get more into the direct cost versus indirect cost.
Okay, so these are the two major types of costs that are going to be in your budget. Direct and indirect. So direct are those specific items that Jen basically just went over that have a cost assigned to them that you know of, that you know you're going to need to perform the work. Salaries, supplies, travel, publication, all that stuff. And the main point is that those three things need to be reasonable. The costs need to be based on actual costs, like your actual salary, estimates for travel, estimates for supplies that are based on things that, like invoices, quotes. You don't necessarily need to provide that documentation, but that's where you need to draw your costs from. They need to be allowable. They need to be something that FSU policy would allow and that the sponsor would allow. And they need to be allocable, and that means that they just need to provide a benefit to the project. You just need to have a reason why you're charging it, why you would request it for this project. It's not a question of, I need something for this project, I'll build it over into this project so that I have it paid for and then can share it over here. That's possible to do, but then you wouldn't put the full 100% of the cost on this one project because you're allocating some of it here, some of it there. Does that make sense? Okay. The other category is indirect costs, everyone's favorite thing. Those are also known as overhead. We call it F&A here, which stands for facilities and administrative costs. And it's just the research operating costs. You can't parse those out. You'd go crazy if you tried because it covers building depreciation, utilities, administrative support, all the things that we need to be able to conduct research at FSU and to be a research university. This indirect cost is calculated by percentage, and it helps recoup a portion of the costs that go into, say, having human subjects committee, having a disclosure system, all the things that we need. So the main focus is going to be on building up your direct costs, but you always need to keep indirect in mind in case there's a funding limit, a total funding limit. Sometimes there'll just be a direct cost limit, which means you don't have to worry about your indirect on top of it. But if it's an overall total, then you'll need to be thinking of indirect early because that will take up a portion. Did I miss anything?
Okay.
Okay. Oh, there we go. Okay, so we're just going to go over, touch on how to calculate a few of the really common budget categories. So for salaries and fringe, FSU doesn't do hourly rates. We don't keep timesheets, obviously. We calculate, we use a percentage of effort to track your time. And that's known as person months or a percentage of FTE. And there's a really simple way to do it. You just take your time on the project, your months on the project, divided by the months of your appointment that you're gonna use on the project. Or, no, sorry. The time on the project divided by your months on the project, that will give you your percent effort. You can work backwards too, it's really easy if you just know, I wanna spend 25% of my academic time on this project. There are handy dandy person month converters online that will do that real easy for you. This is how you calculate it. So it's based on 12-month appointment, 9-month appointment, or whether you're working during the summer term. And so really easy way of getting salary for that is using pay periods. So say you're a 9-month appointee, but you're gonna work during summer and you wanna spend 1 month of summer. So there's 6.5 pay periods in summer, which equals to 2.2 pay periods per month. So all I would do is take your Omni biweekly rate times 2.2, and then you have your monthly salary request for 1 month. Oh, yeah, you can include, you can build that, a 3% cost of living increase in your out years. Generally, all you would say in your budget justification is that a 3% cost of living is included for out years. That's a good way to just say what you're doing. Sometimes you can do that in year 1 as well. If you're applying for a project the next year and you know your pay rate is going to go up, you can start year 1 with a 3% increase. If you know you're going to have a 10-year increase, you can include that as well. You just need to explain what you're doing. Like 1 year will be 3%, another would be 12%, and then you're back to 3%.
And this is for budget, so your salary does not change unless your salary actually changes. So you can budget the 3%, it's allowed because it could be an unknown, right? We have across the board increases for faculty, we have promotions for faculty. So you can budget it that way, but just don't go to your dean and say, hey, I built in a 3% budget increase next year, so I need you to give me a 3% raise. That's not the way it works.
And if heaven forbid, something fell through, the actual cost of your salary is what's going to be charged to the project. We wouldn't charge it based on what was proposed. Okay, 9-month versus 12-month in health insurance. As most of you probably know, health insurance is not collected during the summer. So if you have a 9-month appointment and you're working during summer, you wouldn't ask for health insurance because it's not something that FSU collects during that time. We can only ask for actual costs. So if you have a 12-month appointment, you can throw that in. If you're working during academic time, the 9 months, you can include it. But if you're working during summer and you're a 9-month appointee, then you wouldn't request it. And once you have your salary costs, you just add your fringe rate on top of that, which includes workers' compensation, Medicare, a couple other things. Depending on whether you're ORP or drop, there's a percentage that you just take your you take your salary total for the month times that percentage, and that's your fringe. We do have the fact sheet on the sponsored research website. They change pretty frequently, and we try to send out notices for that. So it's something that you'd want to check every time you're building a budget. Okay, so if you have a grad student that you want to appoint as your research assistant, these are the costs that you're going to need to consider. They are, when they're appointed to the project, they're considered salaried employees. So I know it says stipend up there. That language is from the bargaining agreement for the grad students. But when they're appointed, they don't receive a stipend. They receive some. We correct that at my level. So for grad students, if they're appointed at 0.50 FTE, that's considered full-time for grad students. And there's the new minimum there, and they do get fringe as well at the OPS student rate, which is on our website. They also would be entitled to a health insurance subsidy, and those exact words would be used in any budget justification because it is a subsidy towards the purchase of FSU health insurance. So if they elect not to purchase health insurance through FSU, they do not receive that subsidy. So it's a set amount. It's also on the fact sheet on the website. And another thing to think of when you have grad students appointed to a project is that it's very likely that tuition is going to attach, meaning someone needs to pay for their tuition. You can ask for it through the grant, it could go through your college's allocation, but somebody's going to need to pay for it that's not the student generally. So most people, or a lot of people, ask for it in their project budget, which is a totally reasonable and normal request to make. And per the university's published projections, we would increase that at 1% each year.
Not just to add for the health insurance subsidy, there's a different rate for domestic versus international students. So if you know who your student is, you can obviously pick the appropriate rate. If you don't know who your student is, you may want to consider budgeting at the international rate because it's higher than the domestic rate. That way, if you do have an international student, you're not short that difference.
Good point.
Help me understand, so minimum stipend is 0.5. That means you can't have a student at 0.25 FTE?
No, so the minimum stipend for a GA that's appointed at 0.5 FTE is $15,000, but it's also prorated at $19.23 an hour if they're less than 0.5 FTE.
Okay.
So that's what that line is. To go back up to the first line, just to kind of touch on that a little more, this is per the collective bargaining agreement with the graduate student, so this is not a sponsored research policy. They actually negotiate this now with the university. So they're considered, because they're students first, full-time at what is half-time for staff and faculty. You can by exception get them up to like 0.75, but it is a hard stop at 0.75. You cannot appoint a GA higher than that. And you can only appoint them greater than 0.5 by exception. So we typically say 0.5 is considered full-time for a grad student because they're also taking 9 hours of school that they need to focus on.
And so if you have less time for a student, is there a point when fringe does not come into play?
No.
No.
They always get fringe.
The health insurance subsidy is prorated based on their appointment, so there's an amount if they're appointed at 0.5 FTE, there's an amount if they're at 0.25 this semester and 0.5 this semester, so there is some proration in the health subsidy, but the fringe itself is the same fringe rate regardless of their appointment. Since it's a percentage of their appointment, it is, if you think about it, prorated, but the fringe rate itself is the same.
So there's flexibility in the appointments. Sorry, go ahead.
Who allows if the student can be at 0.75 or not?
The graduate school.
The Dean of Graduate Studies?
Yes, and I
Meaning
believe,
the
so
graduate school?
HR Faculty Relations actually also manages the graduate students. I think they need to expand their name to faculty and graduate students. So I believe, I don't know if it's the dean himself or someone in faculty relations designated to the graduate school, but it's that combination of group. It's not sponsored research. And the only time I typically see it is possibly in the summer, but then there's this conundrum that presents itself because they have to be in so many hours, enrolled in so many hours to be a graduate assistant job record. So when you say, well, they're enrolled in less hours, so I want to appoint them more, then they say, well, then they're not enrolled in enough hours for them to be considered a graduate assistant, and you have to move them into another OPS job record. So all that kind of plays on itself.
Common, Jen mentioned equipment. The federal definition of equipment means that it has to have a $5,000 or more cost per unit. So if you're buying things and they're under $5,000, probably wouldn't consider it equipment. It would just go under supplies. For travel, we do want to see this broken down by flight, lodging, meals, per diem, baggage fees, incidentals. And we understand that this is an estimate, but it still needs to be based on actual costs. So I found it's pretty easy if you're allotting $2,000 for travel, just to start with that and then break it out, and anything else that doesn't quite fit, tuck that into incidentals. There you go. It's not that hard. So we do have to use our meal rates and per diem rates of $80 a day, and then the meals, which are $36. Those are set by the state of Florida. FSU uses those. You can find, if you just Google, I think, FSU Travel Guide, it'll give you a nice little breakdown of what those are and how to use them. It's also found on FSU's controller's website. So typically we do want you to differentiate between domestic and foreign, because if you're doing foreign travel, you can use the U.S. Department of State per diem rates. And we do need a detailed justification, which I just mentioned about the breakdown of all the costs that are going into that amount.
And one caveat, the bullet there says must be in accordance with FSU travel policies. There's a little bit of a caveat to that. The federal regulations basically say that between the sponsor and the university, whatever is the more restrictive travel policy is what has to be followed. So if your sponsor had a travel policy that was allowed, let's say, for less of a per night lodging rate or a per diem rate, you would have to follow the sponsor policy. So it's whichever one is more restrictive is what we're forced to follow.
And for travel within Florida, you're limited to $150 a night for lodging. But typically, when you're talking about conferences and travel for a research project or some other sponsored activity, I don't find that a lot of them are in Florida, but that's something to keep in mind. If you're going to DC, obviously you can ask for $200, $215, whatever for a night. If you're going somewhere in Florida, you might be restricted to $150 just because that's the state of Florida rate for overnight. And yeah, those rates haven't changed in a while and they're pretty low, but that's what we gotta stick with.
And one thing that just, again, as Laura mentioned, these are set by the state, but a lot of things that comes up is, well, our first example, meal money, it's $36 a day. It doesn't matter whether you're traveling to New York, Las Vegas, or middle of Minnesota, it's $36 a day. So that's just, again, something that the state has set. We've tried to talk with them, but it's bigger than Florida State, it's bigger than the SUS, schools, but is to try and, there are different rates for international, and the international rates are vary based on country. So it actually looks at where are you going and what is the cost of living there. But within the continental US, it's all one fixed amount.
And if you don't know where you're going, which is possible, you could just say to be determined, and then you just use your best guess.
What did you say was $36 a day?
That's it's our meal money. So per diem is $80 per day, that's when you're not claiming lodging. The $36 a day is actually $6 for breakfast, $11 for lunch, $19 for dinner.
And not claiming lodging.
Correct.
Right.
You cannot claim lodging on a day that you claim per diem. So the 36 is when you are claiming lodging. And as she mentioned, I Google it all the time, so I get the recent one, but FSU Travel Reference Guide, it's a very handy little one-pager that has per diem rates and meal money, lodging limits, all those kind of things, mileage rates.
And I really wouldn't worry about trying to break it down for just lunch and dinner. I just do the 36, do 80, that's good enough.
Because that's based on, you have to leave before 7:30 to be eligible for breakfast, and who knows in 6 months what time my flight is to go to a conference. I haven't even figured out where my location is yet. So yeah, I would definitely give yourself the full amount in the budget.
Participant support is for when you're providing funds for someone to attend a conference or training and they can't be an employee of FSU or the project. It would be fees, their food, travel, things like that, specifically for that purpose. An incentive is just something to encourage folks to participate in your research projects, such as taking a survey, participating in an interview. And the difference is that participant support is excluded from indirect, but participant incentives are not. FSU has a policy on participant support to help you understand what that is. It's based on NSFs.
And the uniform guidance actually says that a speaker at a conference is not considered a participant. So if someone is traveling to a conference to speak, you could pay for their travel, and you could budget that in travel, but you would not pay for that as a participant support.
Right, so a conference room rental, that is not participant support. That's just the cost of you putting on a conference. Participant support has to specifically go to the folks that are coming to be trained or attending this conference, not the cost to the project of putting on that conference. So conference supplies, not participant support. Okay, so we touched on tuition as being something you want to think about. We mention it here again because it just, as a note, you wouldn't put tuition up there with the salary cost because it's not salary, it's just a thing that FSU does as the university. So that cost would go down in other. Materials and supplies, as Jen already mentioned. Publications, consultants. Anything else that you need, transcription. You know, if you don't see a category there, just create other and tuck all those in there. And, you know, although in the budget it might just be other $12,000, in your justification is where you're gonna break all that out so they know what all is in there. Any specific questions about, do you want me to touch on subawards at all, or no?
You can, yeah,
We good?
yeah.
Okay.
Close on time as far as the other stuff.
Okay. So, if you're gonna subaward part of this out to, say, faculty at another institution, that will affect your indirect cost because, we exclude any funds in excess of $25K from indirect cost calculation. You do need to make a clear determination whether it's truly a subrecipient or a contractor. A subrecipient would be, they're working on the project just like you. They're gonna be subject to all the same rules and regs that you are. And they're really involved in having a successful project and meeting your deliverables. Whereas a contractor or vendor, they do that sort of work for everybody. So, whereas the relationship with subawards will be much more involved with a contractor or vendor, you just might need a quote, you'll do a purchase order, you know, it's much simpler. But it does impact your budget's bottom line. And I think that's it.
So
Anything else?
only with the sub-recipient, you have to pay the 25K?
What's that?
Only with the sub-recipient, you do have to pay the 25K?
You
With-
have to.
With the contractor, you do not?
Contractor, you pay it on all of it.
All of it.
So on the subawards, it's every subaward, we include the first 25,000 in the indirect cost calculation. With a contractor, you would include the total cost of any work that they were doing.
So if your subaward is $50,000, you'd only include indirect costs using the first 25K of that. Every year thereafter, excluded. For each subaward, not combined.
And I'll show you that in a little bit in a second on this slide as well.
I'm gonna stop there.
Yeah. Okay, so we kind of hit on some of this, so I'm gonna kind of bounce through this slide pretty quickly, but the indirect cost, so this is a federally negotiated rate. Every research institution is assigned a cognizant agency, ours is DHHS, and we actually have to build out a rate proposal for them. It's a 5-year proposal. They come in and review all the costs. These are all the indirect costs that, as we mentioned, are facilities and administration. They come in, we basically tell them that if we recovered full, and don't quote me on these numbers, but if we recovered, you know, full F&A on the total cost that it takes to do research administration at Florida State, it'd be a 65% F&A rate. And then they look at it and they say, well, we're gonna pick off some of these expenses, or we just aren't gonna give you that much, and your approved rate is 54%. So that's kind of how that process works. So it's not just, you know, us sitting there and deciding what that number is. It's a very lengthy process. We actually usually hire an outside consultant to come and help us prepare that because of all the data that has to go into it. And then the cognizant agency gets it back to do all their review and analysis, and then we kind of go back and forth. So that's how that F&A rate gets established. It is based on the sponsor, the project location, and the project purpose. We gave you guys a kind of cutouts of the fact sheet just for some of the exercises today, but as Laura mentioned, we want to refer to that online. But you'll see whether it's a research project or if it's an other sponsored activity or it's an instruction project, it has a different F&A rate, and that's because there are different cost bases that go into those. And also, as I mentioned before, on campus versus off campus. The Mag Lab has a different indirect cost rate than main campus, so that whether the work is gonna be conducted at the Mag Lab impacts your rate. So there are variables that you kind of have to, pie chart graph, pull together and find what your FNA rate is. And as Laura mentioned, there are two bases, so we call those modified total direct cost. You typically see this with federal and federal flow-through awards. And then total direct cost, which is typically state of Florida and private or foundation or industries. It's typically where we see the TDC. The RFP or the request for proposal will typically dictate which cost basis you're using. So let me explain this a little further. Okay, so when you calculate on NCDC, not everything gets FNA applied to it. So equipment is excluded. So when we're tossing that stuff in the ocean, doesn't have to get charged FNA. Tuition is excluded. Rent for offsite facilities, so that's important. If you pay rent to an FSU facility, which there are a few that do, that's not the same thing, so it has to be to an offsite facility. Participant support cost, again, not incentives. Subcontracts in excess of $25,000, and then scholarships and fellowships.
Can you give an example of like participant support costs? Because I'm not seeing in my brain what that could possibly be.
So let me give you the most straightforward example. So there are some training grants, so you actually get a grant to put on a workshop to train, it could be on data collection, let's say. I select 20 undergraduates from the state of Florida that I want to give a stipend to pay their travel costs to come and attend that conference. That's participant support. So I'm paying for them to benefit to come to my conference and learn and so training.
So like if I did some kind of workshop or something and wanted people to come and I wanted to pay.
If you wanted to pay like their registration fee or their travel, it's not typically just it has to be tied to a cost for them to attend. So you wouldn't see it as necessarily just a nominal payment as much as here's a $500 travel allowance. Yes. And as she mentioned, incentives are more like I need 25 people to complete a survey, so I'll give you a $5 gift card if you'll fill out the survey. So that's an incentive for them to complete the survey for you. All right, so that's NCDC. TDC, a little confusing on the name, total direct cost, except tuition. So that's an internal FSU policy. We just exclude FNA on all tuition cost. So TDC is going to have all these will be calculated with FNA, and then we'll just exclude the tuition portion. Two other topics we wanted to kind of just touch on today. So cost share and funding caps. So FSU's policy on, so cost share is when I need $10,000 to do the scope of work, but the sponsor's only giving me $8,000. Where's that other $2,000 coming from? That's cost share. Who's sharing in the cost of this project? FSU's policy is the only time that we approve cost share is when it's required by the sponsor. So you'll see sometimes in the solicitations it'll say, this is $1 million project and you have to cost share 25%. So you have to contribute funds in order to be eligible for the award. When uniform guidance came out, they explicitly stated that unless cost share is required in the solicitation, it is not considered for review, for merit review. So back under 821, we used to get a lot of, this will make my proposal look better if I say we're contributing money. But with uniform guidance, that's not the case. So you'll typically see that spelled out, and I even see that for non-federal sponsors. If they are considering cost share as part of their merit review, they will say that in some way or the other in the solicitation.
Like for preference points or something.
Correct. Funding caps, as Laura mentioned, sometimes this is on total award, sometimes it's just on direct cost, sometimes it's on indirect cost, sometimes it's on salary. So NIH has a salary cap, so you can only have so much salary. So if your PI makes more than the salary cap, then you have to actually cost share that additional amount. And that's all has to be tracked so that we can report back to them. So this little formula, which is on your handouts that you got, if you do have indirect costs included, you can take your total cost that your, the total project budget and minus your exclusions and then divide to tell you how much you have to budget towards direct costs. So that's just kind of a little cheat formula for you there. All right, so budget exercise. So let's go through this for you. Laura, you want to come over here and drive? All right, so we wanted to show you guys, now that you guys are all experts in budgets, we wanted to show you kind of how this would work at, again, a very simple level. So I think you'll hit escape, but let me talk about this for 1 second. So I joke, and there's a lot of faculty in the room, so I joke very respectfully, but faculty tend to come to their department research administrators and say, hey, I want to submit this proposal, and I need some salary, and maybe some supplies, and maybe I'm going to travel somewhere, and I'm probably going to publish something, and I don't know what my indirect cost rate is. So then you go, okay, let's build a budget.
Definitely
So-
never happened to me before.
Never, right? So I don't want to put you guys on the spot. I'll fall on the sword, but this is where we usually start. Yes, by the end of it, you guys know exactly what you're doing and where you're going and how much money you need to get there. But this is usually where we start. Okay, so we're going to assume that this is a 12-month faculty member, and you've got one of these blank ones if you want to work through this with us, but I can also email this out to everybody afterwards. So we're going to assume this is a 12-month faculty member with $130,500 salary. So we're going to plug that into their annual salary. And then like we talked about, calculating this on a bi-weekly is going to be your most accurate. So don't expect to remember this exactly, but 12-month faculty, there's 26.1 pay periods. So you're going to take their annual salary of $130,000 and divide it by 26.1 to get their bi-weekly. Or you can cheat and go to job data and just pull it out of there and on me. But for us to understand. All right, and then they want to get a month of salary. So we use 2.2 pay periods for 1 month of salary because that's the average that fall within a month period. So we would take their biweekly times 2.2 pay periods to get their total salary of $11,000. So that's how much salary they need budgeted. Then they have the ORP retirement plan. So if you see on this cheat sheet, that fact sheet that we printed out, front page, it says FSU fact sheet at the top. You've got your fringe benefit rates. You'll see the first line is FRS retirement plan, and the second one is ORP. And if you take that across, that's 17.06% is the fringe rate. So you're going to multiply their salary times their fringe rate in order to calculate what their fringe is. So in this case, that's $1,876.60. Then they have the individual health insurance. So if you look again on your fact sheet, you can see they give you annual costs and they give you biweekly costs. So when we're doing this on a biweekly basis, you can plug in that biweekly amount. So the individual, as of July 1, has individual health insurance. It's $342 a biweekly. So we can plug in the $342 and multiply that times the number of pay periods to give us the exact amount of insurance that we need to budget. So that gives us a total salary. So that all adds together, we've got $13,000 and some change in salary. They need a grad student. Let's assume this grad student, I made math easy here for you guys, is $26,100. Again, graduate students are considered a 12-month appointment. Even though they might not be appointed for that entire full 12 months, that's what their salaries are calculated on. So we're dividing that by 26.1 to come up with a biweekly. So that's how you see their salary annualized in Omni. So we're always looking at kind of an annualized salary.
I thought grad student was 15,000. Did I miss?
That's the minimum,
Oh.
but it can be anything over that.
Okay.
Mhm.
So you're just saying.
Yeah, I just did that so 26.1 would be easy math.
Okay.
So is this like coming from the department, what that rate would be?
So yes, so some departments have set rates for like first year students, second year students, master students, postdoc, or excuse me, PhD students. Others, it's set by the PI. If you know who your grad student is, you can obviously look at that grad student's exact salary. We're not gonna name them in the project because if they leave, then you have to go back to your agency and say, hey, sorry, this grad student left. So we're just gonna call them a grad student, but you can know who it is and you can actually look at their exact salary.
And if you don't know, what do you suggest?
To be named?
To be named would be for the name. If you don't know the amount that they're going to make, I would say historically, what are you guys currently paying your grad students? So
Or
look at
or
other
use
grad
the
students.
minimum.
Or the minimum.
Yeah.
And if we happen to have to hire someone with a higher, would there at that point be room to negotiation, or once we're locked in, we're locked in?
There are not many sponsors you can go back to and ask for more money. I mean, you can, there are not many sponsors that say yes when you go back and ask for more money, let me rephrase that. So yes, so that's why I would say you can certainly use the minimum. I mean, that's better than nothing, but if you've hired grad students in the past on, in this lab or in whatever department that it is, look and see what you've paid them, within the recent past and go ahead and use that as an estimate.
Yeah, and if your budget looks good, if you have the room to ask for more that's still reasonable, then ask for more.
Yeah. If you put in like $100,000 salary for your GA, it's probably not gonna make it past smell test, but, so something reasonable in there. All right, so we've got their total salary, so they wanted to be appointed for the full year, so obviously this was kind of just for exercise for us to see the same calculations, but so they're gonna have 26,100. The fringe rate for them, because they don't have health insurance and they don't have retirement, it's significantly lower than it is for full-time faculty and staff. So again, looking at your fringe sheet, we're only talking about 0.1%, not 1.1% fringe is all that we charge on OPS students, which are considered grad students. So that gives us their fringe, and then we need to give them their health insurance subsidy. So for the sake of this, let's say they're a full-time domestic student, so that's $1,883. So they're appointed fully to the project, so their health insurance subsidy is fully gonna go on the project. So we'll build that in, and then that would give us the total, so that's your total salary of 26,000, your fringe, and then your health insurance, so that gives us 28,000. Can you see, or am I here right here? Sorry, move over. 28,000. So when we budget for grad students, we also have to budget for tuition. Thank you. So again, you can refer to your fact sheet for what the tuition rates are at the time. Since they're going to be appointed for the full year, they're going to get the full tuition stipend. So that's $11,004 currently. That does change. So obviously, if you're budgeting multiple years, you can factor in that escalation as you budget multiple years. And then your PI told you they were going to travel somewhere and take their grad student and attend a conference. So what I typically tell people is look at prior trips, use state of Florida rates. As we talked about, you've got to have some cost basis for that. So if you calculated airfare, it was $600, there were some lodging, meals, incidentals. So we estimate it'd be about $2,083 a person. So that'll give us, if they want to send 2 people, we'll put $4,166 in there. And they do know it's going to be a domestic conference, so we can put it in domestic. There's some flexibility if it ends up being foreign. That's something that's staying within travel. So unless the sponsor is limiting foreign travel, you wouldn't have to go back to them for approval. But if you know where it's going to be, then you can go ahead and include that. So supplies, we'll just throw 5. We talked to the PI. None of this is made up, right? I've talked to the PI. I know exactly what they want. They've told me their cost. I've either got quotes or I've got prior purchases that I can base this off of. Sponsored research is not looking to say, oh no, last time you bought this widget it was $400, but you just need to have some sort of cost basis, to make sure that these are all reasonable. Publication cost, so he's going to publish in 2 different journals, so we'll put in, $500. So that gets us down to our total direct cost. So this is all those calculations that we just came up with, and we're going to use the NCDC base. So using that, we don't have equipment. We don't have participant supports, we don't have subawards in this, so the only thing that we have to exclude is the tuition. So it's going to be those total direct costs minus the tuition on the project, and that gives you your base, so that's the $51,300. Then our F&A rate, this is an on-campus federal research project, so that's 54% F&A. So you multiply your indirect cost rate by your base, so you want to multiply it by what you've excluded. So that gives us $27,000 in indirect cost. So then when you add your total direct cost and your IDC, $90,000 is what we've determined we need to budget for this proposal. Yes?
If you are hiring undergraduates to work as employees, as part of this grant, you just include the minimum wage, the state's minimum wage.
Again, or if you've hired them in the past and you know that you usually pay them $10 an hour in your department, you can include reasonable based on what you've had in the past.
No other associations like tuition, nothing else required?
They don't get tuition. They do have fringe. It's at 0.1%. So there's an OPS students and an OPS non-students, which includes postdocs. There are fringe for them. So they do have to pay that fringe because we do have to pay workers' comp for them. We don't pay any of the leave payouts or retirement or things, but we do have to pay workers' comp.
Gotcha.
And we can build in there the 3% annual cost of living.
Yep. So you can have this could be year 1 and year 2 can be next to it, and if you're gonna have, the same percentage of effort on the project, you can do, the first column times 3% is your next year's budget.
And so, just so that I'm clear, so when you're budgeting the PI salary, that's based on how much, percentage of your time you think you're going to be putting on the project, and then calculating that in months.
Months,
Or
pay
by
periods,
whatever.
yeah.
So, so it's just like you go to like your AOR and I'm like, okay, I'm gonna do 20% of my time on the grant and then calculate it from there?
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if you're a 9-month appointee, you do need to figure out whether you're gonna do that during academic or something.
Can you do both? Like, I'm gonna get
Yes.
some time in, okay.
So because if you're 9 months and you're going to appoint yourself soft-funded in the summer, then you kind of become quasi 12-month, right? Because now your 9-month salary, you have to annualize out to what 12 months of that looks like. So
Okay.
typically we see 9 months is on, right, E&G funds, it's your academic year appointment, and then in the summer, you're soft money funded on C&G funds. So it's not part of that 9-month salary, it's in addition to.
Mhm.
All right, we did an exercise that you guys, well, actually, one more thing before I do that. You've also got in your handout a sample of a budget justification. This is just, we wanted to show you guys this format. So based on the budget that we just built, we built out a budget justification. And you can see how, as Laura had mentioned before, it's really just spelling out. Just think of it as the narrative that goes along with the numbers. So tell me what those numbers are in that spreadsheet, so then you can follow along with that. This is where you're gonna see a lot of the itemized detail for travel, or under supply cost, it estimated out, or 2 trips versus 1. So again, it's summarized here, and then your narrative in detail goes in your justification. We had another exercise, same concept, but for you guys to do independently, but because we're tight on time and I wanna show you this other workbook, I'm gonna skip that. But you've got the budget assumptions handout. That is basically just the information that you need in order to build the budget. And I can get Beth to email you guys out the answer key if you wanna do it and kind of check yourself to see if you're understanding the concept, so real quick, I wanna show you, this is a very simplified format that I just wanted to use for today to make sure that we can kind of talk through the process. As I mentioned, we've built a budget workbook that can do a lot of this for you. I know it's kind of overwhelming to look at, but the yellow cells are all that you actually have to like input data for. So here you can actually enter the PI's name, and you can, I've got some data filled in here. This is their current salary per pay period, I've already calculated, and then how many pay periods I want to appoint them, and then it's actually calculating out for me with an escalation what that looks like. You can change the amounts per year and things, the amount of effort per year. It also lets you select their retirement plan, so this is here. Oh, I've protected this so people wouldn't change it. But when you select their rate, it actually fills in this formula for you here. And it'll calculate out their fringe based on how much you've allocated in salary, and also their health insurance type, if you individual, spouse, family. And this, like I said, will be posted to the sponsored research website. It has an as of date, so you know what date the rates are effective as of. And anytime our rates change, we'll put out a new version. So if you are gonna use this, I would recommend make sure you've got the current version, because with this all being formula based, you're gonna have off budgets if you have an old version. So same thing for your PIs coming down for your senior salary here, co-PIs, excuse me. And then it also has them built in for other personnel. These can be research associates or someone else working on the project that's maybe not co-PI level. Postdocs built in. It has their fringe rate specific.
How come the years are 2-year periods? Is that intentional or?
No.
Okay.
That was me filling in data and made a typo. I'll correct it, thank you though. Yeah, those should be annual, so I'll correct this before I send it to you guys. And then grad students, undergrad students, here's where that fringe is, even for them, but since this is fixed, those are all locked. So it gives you OPS, then it gets down here into travel, so you can enter travel. It'll calculate tuition for you if you say how many credit hours that you want to give them. It multiplies it by the number of grad students that you've got on the project, so it can do those calculations for you. Obviously this, as we kind of talked through, you guys realize this section is really, there's not really any formula derivative for determining how much supplies and travel, so those are all just fillable boxes. It does have the subawards broken down between the first 25,000 and then anything after 25,000, so that way the formulas work for the indirect cost. This mirrors the budget summary format for sponsored research, so that's kind of why the flow is the way it is. And then it gets down here, it gives you total direct cost. You get to pick what direct cost base you have, TDC versus NCDC, so it knows what to exclude. And then you can enter your F&A rate, since that varies based on the factors we talked about before. And then it'll calculate out all of your total budget for you at the bottom. It does have some funding cap calculators down here. This doesn't project back, or doesn't fill back into the top of the budget. It's just in case you need to use a calculator at the bottom if you're trying to determine how much total cost or anything like that. So this is available. It's got that salary cap calculator we talked about. So, 12-month faculty, the salary cap's $192,000. You've got someone making $200,000, and it can actually calculate for you what can go on the project versus what needs to be cost shared. So that's the budget work. So, that's what we've got. We've hit we're actually over a few minutes. Does anyone have any questions or anything? We'll be around for a little bit if you guys want to talk.
Real quick, if it is NSF versus NIH, is there certain staff in your offices that you deal with directly, or?
We are designated by departments.
Okay.
So it doesn't matter who your funding source is, whoever your administrator is for your department will administer all of your grants. And unless it's Research Foundation versus sponsored research, obviously.
Right.
But within sponsored research, yeah, several years ago, we did it by funding source, and then you were working with different people all the time and you didn't know who to call, and so we've gone to department assignments.
I have a question about cost share. Suppose that I'm committing 20% of my time to a project. So once this project is funded, then who is going to monitor that I'm actually contributing 20% of my time?
So we have our facet reports, which is where you capture that effort. So it pulls from the payroll system, and if you have committed 20% effort and you only have 10% payroll, it gives you an error. And you either have to contact sponsored research and say, I'm pushing that commitment, I'm gonna do that remaining 10% next semester, or my payroll was incorrect and you need your department to reallocate how your payroll was. Side note, not necessarily from budgets, it's really important that when you certify a facet, it's correct. Because if you certify it and then you realize you didn't need a commitment effort and you go back and change it, you're basically telling our auditors, I lied when I certified it. That's how they look at it. And then we have to defend that it's an auditable system. So footnotes, facet certification, make sure it is truly what you want it to be when you hit that I approve button. But yes, it is being monitored. We have a facet representative in sponsored research that monitors all of those effort commitments and books them into facet.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Can I real quick just ask, how many people here will be at new faculty orientation coming up? 1, 2? Okay. Some of the things that were brought up as far as like what's Research Foundation, what's Foundation, I'm going to be talking about that at new faculty orientation and walking you through the different departments under the Office of Research and who you go to when. So it'll hopefully unmuddy some of this. And if any of you aren't going and have this type of questions, I'm happy to talk to you through that.
But also, if you found your funding opportunity and you're starting to build your budget and you don't have a departmental resource, I think OQD has started to do budgets, but you can always contact your grants officer and sponsored research. We're always willing to help set you on the right track so that your budget is in good shape with plenty of time to submit.